December 2025 was not just another month on the global pop calendar. For Jungkook, it became a moment of reflection, scrutiny, and renewed global attention unlike any other. As the youngest member of BTS returned fully to public life, following the completion of his military service, the world did not simply welcome him back, it watched him more closely than ever before. International media outlets from the United States, Europe, Japan, and Southeast Asia began publishing in-depth pieces examining Jungkook's post-military presence. Headlines did not focus on controversy, nor did they celebrate achievements alone. Instead, they asked a deeper question. What does it truly mean to be Jungkook in 2025? The coverage was not accusatory, it was observational. Jungkook was being discussed not just as a K-pop idol, but as a global cultural figure navigating expectations that few people on Earth could ever fully understand. With brand deals, variety show appearances, global streaming numbers, and BTS's long-anticipated reunion all converging at once, Jungkook stood at the center of an unprecedented convergence of attention. December 2025 marked a moment when success, responsibility, and personal well-being collided in the public conversation. Jungkook's journey has always been closely followed, but by 2025, his role had evolved far beyond the traditional definition of a K-pop idol. International commentators described him as a global symbol of modern pop stardom. He represented not only Korean music, but also youth culture, fashion influence, digital virality, and the emotional bond between artists and fans in the internet age. Post-military Jungkook was no longer just returning to a career, he was returning to a position of influence that had grown even larger during his absence. Media analysts pointed out that unlike many artists whose momentum slows during mandatory service, Jungkook's presence never truly disappeared. His solo music continued to perform strongly, fan communities remained active, and anticipation only intensified. As a result, December 2025 became less about a comeback and more about a re-entry into a global role that never stopped expanding. One recurring theme in international coverage was the sheer scale of expectation placed on Jungkook's shoulders. Articles emphasized that Jungkook is expected to succeed simultaneously in multiple roles: as a BTS member representing one of the biggest groups in music history, as a solo artist with record-breaking global appeal, as a fashion and brand icon, as a public figure whose every word and gesture is analyzed, as a symbol of resilience, growth, and perfection. Media psychologists cited Jungkook as an example of how modern celebrity culture creates layered pressure. Unlike past generations, today's stars are visible at all times through live streams, social media, fan platforms, and constant news cycles. Every appearance becomes a performance. Every silence becomes speculation. December 2025 coverage emphasized that Jungkook was navigating all of this while transitioning back to civilian life, a process that itself requires emotional and mental adjustment. Interestingly, the conversation around Jungkook's pressure was not driven by scandal or backlash. Instead, it emerged largely from fan concern. Across social platforms, fans expressed admiration mixed with worry. Many praised Jungkook's professionalism and dedication, while also urging rest and balance. International media took note of this dynamic, highlighting how Jungkook's fandom differs from typical celebrity audiences. Rather than demanding constant content, large segments of fans actively advocated for boundaries. This phenomenon was described as protective fandom culture, where emotional investment leads to concern rather than entitlement. Journalists frame this as a sign of changing relationships between artists and fans, one where mental health and sustainability are increasingly part of the conversation. Another critical angle explored in December 2025 was the role of media itself. Several outlets acknowledged the paradox. By discussing the pressure Jungkook faces, they are also contributing to the attention surrounding him. Opinion pieces questioned how media can responsibly cover global stars without amplifying stress. Jungkook was cited as a case study in ethical reporting, how to inform without intruding, analyze without sensationalizing. This self-reflective tone was notable. It suggested a growing awareness within journalism that global pop culture coverage has real psychological consequences for the people at its center. In December 2025, Jungkook did not make any direct public statements addressing the growing discussions about pressure, expectations, or personal well-being. Yet his silence itself became part of the narrative. International media noted that Jungkook's calm, reserved public demeanor stood in contrast to the noise surrounding him. He appeared composed in official schedules, professional in variety appearances, and respectful in interactions with fans. There were no dramatic gestures, no emotional declarations, no attempts to control the narrative. For analysts, this silence was not interpreted as avoidance, but as intentional restraint. In the age of constant communication, choosing not to explain oneself can be a powerful boundary. Media commentators suggested that Jungkook's approach reflected maturity, an understanding that not every conversation requires a response, and not every concern needs public clarification. However, silence in the digital era rarely remains empty. Fans, media, and observers inevitably fill it with interpretation. One of the most thoughtful angles explored by international media was the psychological transition Jungkook experienced after completing military service. Experts interviewed by global outlets explained that returning from mandatory service involves more than resuming work. It requires a recalibration of identity. For someone like Jungkook, who entered the industry as a teenager and spent most of his formative years in the public eye, this transition carries unique weight. Military service introduces structure, anonymity, and routine that contrast sharply with the unpredictability of celebrity life. Returning to fame after such an experience can feel disorienting. Media coverage emphasized that Jungkook was not struggling publicly, but adjusting privately, a distinction that matters. Rather than framing this as a problem, journalists described it as a natural human process, reminding readers that even global superstars must reorient themselves when moving between vastly different worlds. December 2025 also marked a historic moment. BTS reunited as a complete group following the completion of military service by all members. While this reunion was widely celebrated, media outlets pointed out that it also introduced a new layer of pressure, not just for Jungkook, but for the group as a whole. For Jungkook, the expectations were particularly intense. As the youngest member, often described as the group's center of gravity, his energy, image, and performance were closely watched. Journalists emphasized that BTS's return was not simply a comeback, it was a cultural moment. Fans, critics, and the industry projected enormous significance onto their next steps. In this context, Jungkook was no longer carrying only his individual identity, but also contributing to the collective legacy of BTS. Throughout his career, Jungkook has been referred to as the Golden Maknae, a nickname that celebrates versatility, excellence, and natural talent. In December 2025, international media revisited this label with nuance. While the nickname is rooted in admiration, commentators questioned whether it also creates unrealistic expectations. Being perceived as good at everything can limit the freedom to fail, rest, or explore imperfection. Several opinion pieces argued that Jungkook's greatest challenge is not competition, but consistency at an inhuman level. The pressure to remain golden at all times without visible struggle was described as a silent burden, one that many high-achieving figures face but rarely articulate. One of the most striking elements of December 2025 coverage was how fans were portrayed. Rather than framing fandom as demanding or obsessive, many international outlets highlighted fans as emotional stakeholders who genuinely care about Jungkook's long-term well-being. Campaigns encouraging rest, respectful engagement, and boundary awareness gained attention. Fans used language centered on sustainability rather than productivity. This shift was described as a reflection of changing fan culture, one influenced by growing global conversations about mental health, burnout, and work-life balance. Jungkook, intentionally or not, had become a focal point for these discussions. Behind every appearance, endorsement, and broadcast lies an industry built on visibility. Media analysts noted that Jungkook exists at the intersection of art and commerce. His presence drives massive engagement, brand value, and economic impact. December 2025 coverage examined how this commercial ecosystem amplifies pressure. When an individual becomes an engine for global attention, rest can appear incompatible with momentum. However, some industry voices argued that Jungkook's sustained success proves the opposite, that longevity requires strategic pacing, not constant exposure. This perspective framed restraint not as weakness, but as professionalism.